Okay, under new businesses, we have 3 items. First, we have the conservation subdivision ordinance, and then we have accessory dwelling unit ordinance, and then the third one, we have affordable housing subdivision / lot standards ordinance. Who's going to be doing this? Jacob?
Yes, sir. Jacob Lindsay.
Okay. So Jacob, you want to take the first one first and start on down?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would be happy to. And I know that we're time limited here because we've got council coming up at 5:30. So I'm going to try to be respectful of that and leave time for discussion. I do have a few slides on each of these, and I'll give you maybe just a brief orientation on the ordinances, and then we can open for discussion if that works for you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, that'd be fine.
Okay, very good. So just switching over here, I'm going to bring up my slides, and everyone should be seeing the slideshow here for conservation ordinance subdivision. So everybody see slides?
Yes.
Yep,
Yes, excellent, thank you. Okay, so jumping into this very first one, this is the Conservation Development Ordinance Amendment. This is obviously something that a lot of work has gone into this. There's been a significant revision process that has been a collaboration between multiple departments in the city: planning, zoning, stormwater, park, sustainability, traffic and transportation. There's been a walking tour, a lot of analysis of existing sites, stakeholder meetings with neighborhood leaders and council members. Many of you attended those meetings, and thank you for your guidance and leadership, as well as with developers and engineers. So it's been a really robust process of critiquing what used to be called the cluster ordinance and is now known as conservation. So the idea is to take a site and allocate the housing locations to smaller areas and then reserve the best parts of the site for stormwater and open space so that you have the most ecologically sensitive development possible. That is the intent behind this ordinance, and that's what we believe the new one does. And what I'd like to do is maybe just draw your attention to this column where it says proposed revisions. And maybe if we can just go through this list here, this is what we propose to do. The first is to reduce the maximum impervious surface. So that way we have more rainwater percolating into the ground. We've introduced, this is a jargon term, LID, that we all use all the time, low impact development. That means pervious surfaces. That means trees to absorb stormwater. That means doing everything you can to minimize runoff. We also have added a pre-application site review, meaning that if a developer wants to use this, they have to come and sit down before they even submit. We talk through all the things that they are doing right, and we look at their hydrology before they design the site layout, the very, very beginning. This is a major step in the right direction that I think we should do on every project, truthfully, and this is especially relevant here. We also have enhanced open space requirements that are the most stringent in the city for any zoning ordinance. And we have enhanced tree conservation requirements that emphasize groups of trees that can absorb stormwater versus individual big trees. And this is also going to be an item that I think allows us to have much more sensible development in these areas. The last thing is that we have added provisions for affordable housing and accessory dwelling units per our conversation at the last meeting of the Community Development Committee. Now, I have the text of the ordinance here. If we want to bring up any specific slide from the text to discuss it. And with that, I'm going to end my screen share, and I can take back over if you would like to look at any specific ordinance page. The last thing I'll say is that I do have staff who've worked on this, who I know are on the Zoom call, and I believe Mr. Matt Fountain has joined us as well. And Matt, if you are here with us, thank you for doing that at the last minute. I'm really glad you could join us. So we're prepared to answer questions and also just to simply listen to your input. And actually, I wasn't totally forthcoming. I have one more item, which is that in discussing this with the mayor, he feels that it's very important that we do add an element of additional public hearing and review to this. And we are looking at what the best route is to do that. And we want to make sure that the right body reviews this, whether it's the TRC in a public hearing format, the BZA site design, who are probably the most qualified to do that. We're looking at making sure that we have a public hearing that's associated with the conservation ordinance. And it's not purely a by right option, but that it is something that does receive public scrutiny, because that is one of the ways that we want to make sure that everyone does have a chance to review these as they go forward. So we're looking at the best ways to do that right now. So with that, I will open this for discussion, and I will end my screen share.
Jacob?
So, Okay, do we
Yes.
have any questions? Anyone have any questions first?
Jacob Dudley.
Yes.
Quick question for you. Why did we say encourage preservation as opposed to require preservation in the title?
Well, that's a good question. Looking through the ordinance here, the truth of the matter is that it does, in fact, require it. I think that might just be a semantic difference. The open space requirements are higher in this ordinance than any we have ever had before. So there is a required, extremely high level of open space preservation. And as a rule of thumb, I don't think that we've ever had anything that requires this level of conservation. So the truth of the matter is that it does. And as I'm thumbing through the ordinance here, just looking at this,
Why can't we use required then?
We can. Those are just your summary slides, but the answer is that yes, we can change that word so that it does specifically say require.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll make sure those changes are being made too.
Noted.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions?
Yes, sir. Councilmember
Councilwoman
Mitchell.
Jackson?
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I really appreciated a couple of extensive conversations that I had about the details of the ordinance. My two hats in serving on council are really married here. I came to the region proponent for any kind of affordable housing that would be happening in Charleston. And as time has gone on and circumstances has obviously dictated, I now consider myself to be as passionate about the environment, and especially when it comes to watershed protection and all of that. So this ordinance, I think, is a sweet spot of accomplishment as far as I can determine. I was concerned originally about the fact that we were including wetlands in the definition of the 50% of common space that is required by this ordinance. But Mr. Fountain talked me through that. I really appreciate that thorough explanation. And I understand that my misassumption, and maybe some of you share this with me, so that's why I'm trying to make a point here, that I thought wrongly that to get a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers to fill in wetlands, it was getting harder in recent years. But Matt told me that it's actually especially for smaller sites that we're probably looking at here, that the permit process itself is not that rigorous. It's not that demanding of a wetland infill. And so if we would choose to not allow wetlands to be included in the common space formula, then we would be endangering these properties for having developers say, well, then I'm just going to apply to fill in the wetlands, and we wouldn't have any control over that. So I do feel like, it's a balancing act. We're rolling the dice on some level of that this inclusion works. But I am supportive of the way that the ordinance is written on that basis. Oh, and can I just say one other thing while I have the floor? I'm sorry. I'm also, highly in favor of the way that the ordinance has essentially added voluntary bonuses of density for the affordability. I continue to be concerned that I know the definition, the common practice definition of workforce housing goes up to 120% of AMI. I think pragmatically in Charleston, especially if our economy has a reset, that taking a property price to that 120% is going to be shutting a lot of our public servants and the type of jobs that we want to facilitate living close to where they work in our region. And when you think about, my kids moved here in 2016. They were both public educators with experience in their jobs. And they decided before they got here that if they each tried to apply for a teaching position at their current level of experience and education, they wouldn't be able to afford to live in Charleston with a 2-teacher income. So I think that we should be pricing our best offers and this really is a bonus density type situation, to match the crux of the salary ranges that we really want to serve. So I guess I would ask if there's any consideration that we could say that the majority, that the highest workforce price range would end at 100% of AMI. And I know Ms. Johnson, will want to educate me about how that changes the pattern for other ordinances that we have, but I would like to hear about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Councilwoman Jackson. Right now, do we need a motion on this, or this will be referred to a public hearing?
Councilman,
Go ahead, Jacob. I'm sorry.
just before the clerk weighs in, from our standpoint, we're not asking you for a vote on this today. If y'all
Right,
feel
okay.
like you're ready for one, that we would accept that. But we're not requesting that you vote. We were really just looking forward to your comments. But if you feel confident, we'll take that, and I'll hand it over to Jennifer.
Because we still have to go through a public hearing with this anyway. So that's why I'm wondering, because so the public can have an input on this. So I don't know if you need a motion or not. Jennifer, do you think we need a motion on this, or this a motion to send it for a public hearing, or just have it as information for now?
And
I don't know.
legal may want to weigh in as well, but I think you may want to vote on any amendments that you want to make or any recommendations to changes that you would like to make. Chip, I don't know if you had anything to add or not.
Yes, I think that's correct, Jennifer. I think to the extent you want to recommend, I think the motion is to recommend to City Council and maybe the Planning Commission as well, the ordinance as written, except that, with the following amendments.
And to send it to a public hearing?
Yes, sir.
Let's say you want, okay.
Yeah, it'll require 2 public hearings, one before Planning Commission and one before City Council.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Councilmember Gregory?
Yeah, Council Member Jackson raised a question for our Director of Housing and Community Development. Can we hear her answer to that question?
Yes, we can. I just want
So
to.
council
Johnson? Oh,
members, sure, council members and the mayor, my recommendation is that we would stay consistent with 120% of the AMI. Based on any development that we're about to commence upon, we typically determine what target of the affordable housing spectrum we are going to address. And so although we are in difficult times right now, we know that we aren't going to stay here, and this ordinance goes on the books and it changes the AMI, that could adversely impact those who are at 120 unnecessarily. So my recommendation would be to leave it at 120, because we do make the considerations relative to who in the affordability spectrum will be targeted. And as Jacob indicated, we attempt to meet with those developers, or if the city's doing it, we determine early on who could likely afford when we're building a particular project or about to commence construction on a particular parcel. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I think Councilmember Waring has had his hand up, followed
I
by
didn't see it.
Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilman Waring? Councilmember Waring?
Yeah, I had to unmute myself.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lindsay, I think it's a great ordinance, but how does this apply? Is it primarily to single family, or would this apply to multiple family, or both? And then when it comes to our single family, that's one question. And when it comes to our single family zoning categories, would this apply to all, or is this something you trying to create people to do from an incentive standpoint? How does this apply across our zoning various categories?
Thank you, council member. I'm just going to, what I may do here is just bring up our ordinance, if that's okay.
That's
So
fine.
just give me 1 second here, and I will do a screen share. Okay. So let me jump over. You think we would all be experts at this by this point? Okay, here we go.
We lead the region. I know that.
Okay, so you all should be seeing the screen here. Okay, so we're gonna get through our definitions. Now, what this does, first of all, is it applies to these base zonings. If you can see this section right here, base zoning, conservation developments are permitted in these zones: SR1, SR7, R rural residential 1, or C conservation. So these are mostly, these are all single family categories. They're not multifamily categories. That's the first
Right.
important component.
Well, Mr. Lindsay, doesn't SR1 allow clustering by right?
It does, and that's what this ordinance is, council member. This is the cluster ordinance, and it does allow it by right. That's correct. That's what you're looking at. Now, what it does do is it allows this will allow some joining of units to be attached single family in row house format.
Okay, good.
And again, what I'm pointing at right here toward net density is that when first of all, workforce, if you look at item B, workforce housing units meeting the conditions, meaning they have to be workforce housing, shall not count toward the net density. Meaning that if you want to build 5 more, you're at 40, you can build 40 max, and you want to build 5 units of affordable, that's fine. That does not count against your density. And those can be attached, I believe, up to 5 units attached to one another. Hang on just 1 second. I'm going to see if I can bring that up.
6.
Sorry, there we go. If you look at this item right here, be no more than 6 attached dwelling units located within a single row. So it is single family. It does permit some attached, and affordable does not count against the density.
Can we, if we wanted to, can we include more than the single, like you got what, 4 or really 3 single family categories in there? How did you come by just SR1, SR7, was it RR1 you had?
Correct. So those are the zoning categories that are relative low density, and they are in areas where you may have conventional suburban subdivisions.
Okay.
And the goal here with this ordinance is to not build conventional suburban subdivisions, but instead to allow really creative site design that allows the most ecological development possible. So we create space for stormwater, and we create space for tree preservation. That is the reason that we targeted those zoning categories. So you're not going to see cluster subdivisions in the middle of downtown Charleston. This is for areas where you need ecological development.
So why wouldn't SR6 figure in that, maybe even SR4? And listen, I think this is great. I think this is wonderful outside the box thinking on y'all's behalf. I commend you highly for this. I think it's pretty good.
Well, a lot of folks deserve credit on this. A big collaborative effort by a lot of people. So thank you.
So why wouldn't SR6 fit in this category?
So that's a good question, and I'm gonna have to get back to you on that one. It's one that I don't actually know the answer off the top of my head. But these are the categories that in review staff initially determined. These are the ones that we find most often in these areas, but I'll have to get back to you. I don't know the exact reason.
That'd be great. That's fine.
Right.
I think great work, by the way, for everybody involved.
Yeah. Well, could we have a motion on this? Someone and
I move for approval. I'll tell you that.
Along with the amendment.
Second. That's Ross.
Okay, Ross, second. All in favor of our vote by saying aye.
Mr. Chairman, Mayor Tecklenburg had his hand up.
Oh, I couldn't see it, Mayor. All right.
So,
Tecklenburg.
Mr. Chairman and fellow council members, I also want to commend our staff. This is really great work. Couple of things. I did want to point out with the question from Councilmember Jackson on the percentage of the AMI, that it does break it down between home ownership and rental. And if they're rental units, it's targeted at 80% or less. So I felt like that was good. And of course, when we say 120%, if you can qualify for a loan to buy a house and you're at 80% AMI, you're under 120. I mean, you don't have to be at 120. You just have to be less than 120, in that sense. But the other thing that Jacob mentioned, And I guess I just want to have a little discussion about it because this was based on my recollection of some difficulty and comments we had gotten from prior cluster developments that they seemed that they were by right and they needed another level of approval. And this ordinance is so much better. You may not feel that way anymore, but I just wanted to put it out there and have the conversation. Do we want an extra trip to the BZA or an extra trip to city council like a PUD approval to have that extra opportunity for citizen input? The downside of that is what we have put together is really terrific. And do we want to put another step in there for a developer who would want to do all this stuff, which we consider very positive? So I just throw that out to y'all for discussion.
Mr. Chairman.
Councilwoman Jackson.
Thank you. Yeah, I would like to converse about that question too, Mayor, but I also wanted to put on Mr. Lindsay's list to advise us later. It wouldn't stop me from wanting to recommend this to the full council and the process to follow. But on page 6 of the ordinance, under the topic of workforce housing in perpetuity, I asked the question of Mr. Morgan and Ms. Stuber yesterday under whatever that B3, I think it is, B little 3I. There's sort of a confusing paragraph in there about properties have to remain in perpetuity, but if they didn't achieve their net density, then they'd have the right to trade a workforce unit for a full priced unit. And I disagree with that. First of all, I think they should know what they want to build from the get-go. But I also think that it makes into the future, as we're all, getting used to this, and then developers are trying to interpret it, and how everybody likes to maximize their profits over time, that this paragraph in particular might just make it ripe for some sort of loophole that we're not thinking about now. So I wanted to know what the rationale was for having that trade-off opportunity. Why can't we just say that anything that's dedicated as workforce housing units and that doesn't count against the density at the site plan approval is always in perpetuity, and leave it at that? So I don't expect an answer now, but I would like to put that question out there for for our clarity, and then an amendment down the road. So can I also just then take one more minute? I understand the rationale of keeping the workforce definitions to the 120% AMI range. Maybe we don't know the answers to this yet, but my understanding from the ordinance, the way that the cluster ordinance and the mixed use ordinance has gone, and I know that you try to meet with all the developers, Ms. Shaw Johnson, and get them to be as, agreeable to everything that we think is going to work best for the occupants of whatever property we're approving. But at the end of the day, if we give them the choice of putting up their prices to 100 and that they work for 120% of the AMI, it's a by right decision, correct? As long as they're meeting that range. So we don't have the ability to say it's too much for this particular location or the needs that we know are needing to be fulfilled in the housing market. So I don't need an answer for that today either, but I do think we should be clear when we make this vote as a full council. And Mayor, I do think that your idea of having an extra stop for the public to weigh in prior to an automatic subdivision approval by the Planning Commission is going the right direction. I don't foresee the public having less of an interest in development, especially when it comes to the locations that we think these conservation developments will be most well used. It's always going to be in watersheds where there's wetlands or some type of, natural water drainage issues that I do think the public is going to continue to be vigilant about. So I think we're giving them a good service by allowing that step. I don't have anything more to say. I'm sure you'll all be glad about that.
Councilman Waring?
My question is to the mayor. I guess to expand on your point about one hearing versus two. I heard it differently than my colleague did. If they're going to comply with these ordinances, why are we going to require them to come back for a second public hearing? On SR1, if somebody has SR1 now, they by right they can go ahead and design it without these requirements being a part of it. And I think we would like them to design with these this new ordinance being a part of their development. So is that what you were kind of getting to, Mr. Mayor? Do you want the second one, or you were thinking if they're already in compliance with it, why do we need to bring it through again?
Well, again, I think I just had some maybe unpleasant memories from, I forget which developments they were over the last couple of years where they were cluster and they were moving forward because they didn't need that extra meeting or scrutiny. And we were living to regret it. I can't even recall which developments it was.
It may be the Ashleyville, over in Ashleyville. It could have been that one.
Yeah, sure.
Ross here. This may have been the Ashley Hall Plantation development over by Ashley Harbor, and I represented those guys, so I'm familiar with sort of the issues that were presented at that time.
That's the one. That's the one. You're right, Ross.
So this is so positive. I don't really want to create a disincentive for somebody to want to do these things. I just want to make sure that we got our eyes open. If y'all feel like it needs an extra step of scrutiny, now's the time to consider it. I mean, some of these things are so nice, so to speak, that I like. I mean, I'm going to throw out a novel thought that maybe some of these things ought to be applied to regular SR1 and the other zonings.
I agree.
By requirement, but that's another day, maybe a discussion for another day.
I'm in agreement with you.
If anyone else have any questions, we have a motion on the floor.
Mr. Chairman, I think Councilmember Gregory might have had a question.
Councilman Gregory, I didn't see your hand. Yeah. And after this, we'll call for the question. Councilman Gregory?
Sure. I was just wanting to agree with the mayor in terms of the second public hearing. Given what we have been through with the Central Park cluster, I think if we don't do a second public hearing, politically, I think we will have people out there saying that we're not really giving them enough time to participate, et cetera, because that Central Park cluster, folks have been fighting that one for the last year and a half, maybe 2 years. So I do think if we have another public hearing, I think that would ease the potential of us having neighborhood groups, et cetera, saying that we really didn't provide them with enough time to weigh in. So I agree with the mayor's recommendation.
Okay, so with the recommendation, so what we're going to do, we're going to have this, we have a motion on the floor, so we're going to approve this particular item with amendments, with the recommendation.
Mr. Chairman, I was going to ask before everyone votes if someone could restate what the amendments are to the ordinance.
So that's what I'm saying. That's what I was going to ask.
I don't think anybody's yet.
Councilman Waring, you had something else to say before?
I did, because I asked a question to Mr. Lindsay about SR6 being added, or maybe even SR4, but I wanted to he needed time to get back and respond back to that. So if we do pass this motion, will that allow time in the event that if another zoning category could be added or not? That's all I want. I did want to know the answer to that.
Councilmember,
Lindsay has his hand up. Yeah.
I was able to do a little bit of research while I was waiting here, and the reason is that first of all, we can look at adding additional categories later if you like, but in those categories, SR6, SR4, they have the lot sizes are too small in those lots to qualify. It's basically a technicality. That's the reason why. But we can look into additional categories if you like.
Okay. I mean, especially if you're looking at a piece of property that has yet to be subdivided. You know, if you're dealing in a 5-acre tract or something like that, or small infill, which is probably going to happen, in particular West Ashley, James Island, to a lesser degree Johns Island, but areas off of the peninsula, I can see a person going to the zoning category for that very reason. But anyway, okay, I'm good.
Even if this motion is if it's approved, we still can go back and make amendments. Isn't that correct, Mr. Lindsay?
Yeah, hadn't come to council yet.
A good deal. Yeah,
that's what I mean. When it comes to council, we still can make recommendations. Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm ready to vote.
Okay.
So Mr. Chairman, I'd suggest we accept it as is and ask for Mr. Lindsay to come back to us on the additional zoning districts, the affordable housing percentages, and also the second level of approval.
Mr. Mayor, if that's your motion, I'll second it.
All right.
You heard the motion. All in favor, vote by saying aye.
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 Opposes? Ayes have it. So it goes on to city council. And then, okay, we move on to number 2, accessory dwelling unit ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And moving along here, I'll try to be concise. I'm going to go back to a screen share and just show you a few slides on this item as well. Okay. So everyone should be seeing these screens. Okay. So this is our accessory dwelling unit ordinance, which was reviewed at our last CD committee meeting. I have the text of the ordinance here if we need to refer to it. And this chart is the main thing that I want to draw your attention to. We've listened to your input as well as additional input by the mayor. And I want to draw your attention to one specific item that has been revised. The main thing here is this matter of the maximum number of occupants in each ADU. Per your input and mayor's input, that has been changed to 2 adults, which is the lowest number in either of our companion governments. Charleston County and Mount Pleasant both have higher numbers. That is the one of the biggest changes, is that we have 2 adults. We do not regulate the number of children. That's the biggest piece. And then secondarily, the mayor has asked us specifically to look at the matter of requiring affordability for ADUs. And that is something else that we are also looking into, and we would appreciate your input into the affordability requirement component for accessory dwelling units. So with that, I'll keep my introduction short, and we can have open discussion.
Does anyone have any questions, any discussion before we, do we need a motion on this one also?
I move for approval, Mr. Chair.
I second.
Okay, it was moving second. Any questions?
I just want to commend staff again on good work, man.
Any other question?
Mr. Chairman.
I think Mayor Tecklenburg and Councilwoman Jackson have their hands up.
Okay, I'll get Councilwoman Jackson, and then we go to the mayor, and then we can move on.
Great, thank you. So I guess I just wanted to understand better, Mr. Lindsay. Right now the ordinance doesn't have any relationship to affordability, correct?
That's correct. When we submitted this for the committee, it did not have that. And then in further discussion with the mayor, he was clear that he definitely wanted us to have an affordability requirement, which we did discuss at the committee previously. So what I would request of you is that if you all feel that that is the correct thing, if you would like to include that in your motion, we'll make sure to look at the best practices, and we can come back with a recommendation in terms of how to meet that requirement. or you can give us some suggestions about how to incorporate it.
Well, I'm sorry, I know it's been a while, but, and maybe the mayor is going to speak next and make his own recommendations. But I was hoping that maybe Michelle Johnson had thought about it for us and had some recommendations for us to consider. You've been housing homeless people, Gianna, for the last 2 months, so.
Previously I did, and I don't have those with me, but to Jacob's point of recommendation, I too think we need to include those in there. And when planning presented it the first time, we had quite an extensive discussion about that. And so before it gets to council, I'll be sure to get that to Lindsay and his team for consideration and inclusion. I think it's important that we have it.
I would agree. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Mayor, on you.
So I think there's some incentive just to be able to build an ADU in the city of Charleston. Right now, you can't. So, but this allows for a family member to be able to live in it with no affordability requirement whatsoever. And so I was just thinking that, you know, for an outside rental and to create that incentive for someone to even want to build one of these things, they might hold it for their mother-in-law or their child or something like that down the road, or maybe need that right away. And then later on it becomes a rental, and wanted to have that affordability factor. I'd be fine. You know, we just had the discussion on the last ordinance, having that same 120%. I don't want it to be a disincentive, you know, and it's based on income, so, and it's not a big unit, so they'd be able to get a fair rent if they were to build a unit. But you know, I made the point when we talked about this a few weeks ago that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and we see another escalation in real estate prices like we've seen over the last 10 years, we need to try to protect the affordability when we can. And putting this in place is the time to do it. So I just would like to amend your motion respectfully, Councilmember Waring, to have this ordinance include a requirement for when it's rental that have that affordability cap on it.
I accept that amendment, Mr. Mayor.
But, Mr. Mayor, I believe that even if the affordable piece, I think if this is done and you build that unit in your, you know, I think you can rent it for whatever you want to rent it for. That's up to you. Even meeting the criteria, if you want to rent it below that price, that's up to you. Which if you have a family member or whatever you're renting it to. And that is my take on it.
Yeah, if it's your family member, you can rent it for whatever you want.
Right.
But if you're renting it to the open public,
You can.
You got to keep it within those guidelines, right?
Yeah, right. You keep it in that guideline.
Create, in effect, a maximum rent that you could.
Right. If you want to go to maximum, you can. Okay.
You remind me of my Uncle John's philosophy. He used to own Atlantic Tire and Battery, and his philosophy was to give the family price, which meant you charge an extra 10% on the theory that if you can't make money on your family, who can you make money on?
Well, y'all have heard the motion. All in favor, vote by saying aye. If you have any other questions. No other questions?
Aye.
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 Ayes have it. The motion passed. Okay, so we're going down to number 3, which is affordable housing subdivision / lot standards ordinance. I think that was started by Councilmember Waring, I believe.
Yeah, but right now I'm gonna defer to Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, council members. Just going to go back to screen share here. So just a brief introduction of this one, and then we'll move right along. So this is our affordable housing ordinance amendment, and what it does incorporates provisions to allow the subdivision and development of single-family detached and attached affordable housing as a conditional use within multiple base zoning districts. What that means is that it avoids a trip to the BZA for truly affordable projects. And this is really for small projects, individual houses or townhouses. Now, when we looked at this, the staff did a really exhaustive period of research, and you can see these blue stars on the map here. These are all individual case studies that the staff looked at that were in fact sites that needed variances, and they were slowed down, adding time and cost to the process. These, I believe, were mostly, if not all, Gianna's projects that she developed. These are houses that she developed. So we looked in total on 16 different case studies, and these all needed variances for some purpose. And what this does is it would remove that variance process in order to speed up and deliver housing more efficiently. Now, what it does is it applies citywide. It adjusts the regulatory lot standards only for affordable housing. Market rate does not get any bonus. It provides flexible standards for one family detached dwellings in SR1, 2, and 6. And it provides flexible standards for one family detached and attached in these categories. STR, which is single and two family residential. That does not mean short-term rental, by the way. The DRs and DR2F. And what it does not do is it does not change the standards for all new housing. This only applies to affordable. It does not change the subdivision standards for market rate development, and it does not require that all new housing be affordable. This only applies to projects like the ones Gianna builds that are truly affordable. And just a quick summary of the revisions. We have eliminated parking reductions. Before, we had reduced the amount of parking, and on y'all's input, we've eliminated that. So you still have 2 off-street spaces required. The frontage requirements for SR2 remain at 40 feet, except for properties that front streets within Maryville, Ashleyville, which must have a minimum 50-foot frontage to be consistent with the historic town plat. And the streets are listed, which is similar to how we do it in other ordinances. The third item is that the provisions have been added for one family attached dwelling units, townhomes, which we think is a great thing. And the provisions to allow for a traditional Charleston court within DR2 and DR2F, which was a great suggestion from the committee. So those are the revisions that have been added. And then we get into the ordinance text if anyone would like to go to a specific page and reference that. So with that summary, I will stop my screen share and open it to discussion.
Okay, Councilman Waring.
Yeah, thank you. I thank the staff, the mayor, and the whole team for bringing this forward. I mean, this, for new members of council, actually came up as a result of kind of thought about some of the areas that's been so successful on the peninsula, Anson Bar, the French Quarters, Harston Village, and any places that have freedmen cottages. Today, if you want to build a freedmen cottage in the city of Charleston, you can't do it. You have to have, most of those places were built on small lots with small street frontages. Well, as we go about trying to create affordable housing, one of the things you have to do is, one of the higher aspects is the land cost down here is so high as compared to Columbia or Walter Bar for that matter. And one way to do that is parcel up into smaller pieces, hopefully. We have to try to get the private sector to incentivize to build, hopefully, some affordable housing. The city government and tax credit housing cannot be the sole source. We will never begin to build enough if those are the only 2 sources. Although we're doing great jobs there, private sector is just, light speed ahead of us. But if we can create some incentives where it would make sense for the private sector to say, well, for example, I can get, 100 units out of this piece of land market rate, but I can get 120 if I included some affordable units to sell. I think the economies of scale begin to come into play, to being. So we had a lot of talk on this all last year. Maybe it may have been more than a year now, but I thank you highly for bringing this forward, because I think it'll be very applicable, again, in particular, West Ashley, areas west of Peninsula in particular, West Ashley, James Island, Johns Island, as those areas get revitalized. So thanks a lot.
Move
Is
for
there-
approval.
Mr. Chairman?
Is Councilman Pell?
Yes, sir. Councilmember Waring, you can't see me because my video is not on right now, but a tear ran down my cheek after hearing your comments just now. You nailed it. That is exactly right. The way we get more affordable housing in the city of Charleston is by targeted, appropriate regulatory relief and removing the barriers to getting these products on the market. And developers will make affordable housing if it's viable to do so. And when we remove those obstacles in time, expense, unpredictability, things of that nature, that's how we accomplish these results. So cannot be more pleased with this. And really everything that we talked about today, everything we talked about today has got a affordable housing component to it. And it's just a great effort by everyone involved. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Councilmember Jackson, yeah, I totally agree that this is the ordinance that we've been waiting for to accomplish these goals. I really appreciate that we've gone the extra mile to listen to Maryville, Ashleyville, homeowners, neighborhood association, and respect their wishes. So thank you very much for adding the exclusion for that longstanding community. I love the idea of the Charleston courts. I think for people that didn't grow up here, that is truly unique. I mean, I dwelled outside of Washington, D.C. for 40 years, and there were little alleys all around D.C., but over time, most of them just disappeared. So I think the fact that Charleston is still known for its little courts and alleyways, and the fact that we would facilitate creation of these, especially out in the other boroughs, would just be wonderful. I only have a couple of detailed explanations to be had, and you can provide those by the time this gets to full council. So I'm looking at page 6 and section 5, where it just talks about the ability to subdivide within a subdivision. And that's basically my territory out here on James Island. And I know it's true of some of the, other the West Ashley neighborhood. So I understand that you can't subdivide or take advantage of this when the lot sizes don't conform to what's on either side of you. But I don't understand the insert of the last 2 sentences in those 2 paragraphs that are under section 5. So please talk to me about that offline, because it sounds like we prevent it on one hand and then we allow it on the other. So that's what I'm trying to make sense of. I could see that would be a very disturbing factor to some of the older neighborhoods out here that love their larger lots and wouldn't want to see in the middle of a street, just a much smaller footprint. So by right. So you can tell me that later. Thank you.
Mr. Lindsay?
We'll be happy to discuss with you offline, and we'll dig into that as much as we need to and revise if necessary.
Mr. Chairman, I think Mayor Tecklenburg has his hand up.
Okay. Mr. Mayor?
No, I'm good. That might have been an old one.
Okay. Councilman Gregory, you have your hands up?
No, move for approval.
Second.
Second.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we have a motion on the floor. If everyone is satisfied, no other questions, all in favor, vote by saying aye.
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 Opposes? Nay? No opposes. So that's it. We don't have anything else. And have anything else to bring before the committee?
Great committee meeting, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, that was great.
All right.
5:30.
All right. Yeah, see you guys.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
5:30 Saturday?
Day.
Have a good day, everyone. I'll see you
Thanks,
all.
y'all. Great meeting.
It was. But,